So I'm going to give us a brief overview, and hopefully you can all see the slides. This was the best arrangement of slides and beautiful banner painted by Bert Monterona that we could configure. I'm just going to give a brief overview of what the situation is on Negros Island. So maybe I just get a general sense. How many of you in the room here know where Negros Island is? A few of you. So usually, Negros is not a place that gets news media. Usually when we hear about stories in the Philippines, it's through the lens of U.S. interests, and we see a lot of Mindanao or wherever the U.S. armed intervention interest is peaked. And Negros Island tends to kind of fly under the radar of international media, but it is really very newsworthy for us as revolutionaries. So Negros Island is this island here. So northern Philippines, southern Philippines, Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao. And Negros is basically smack dab in the middle. And here it looks like a boot, like a shoe. It is the fourth largest island in the country. It's located in the Visayas region, and its population is about just under 4.5 million people. Negros is a predominantly sugar-based economy. So in particular in the north, vast tracts of land are given over to sugarcane plantations. And after hundreds of years of Spanish colonialism, we still see this hacienda system persist to this day, where there'll be a feudal landlord often living in the colonial home, and then peasant families who are both sugar workers working during the times of planting and harvesting, and then planting their small crops on the side in the downtime or tiempo muertos. There's a high rate of child labor on the island. There are three main thrusts for organizing. There's the Peasant Farmer Organization, KMP. There's the Fisherfolk Organization, Pamalakaya. And then there's an urban poor organization, Kadamai, and those organizations are very strong on the island. Oh, and also, sorry, I missed one, the sugar workers, the National Federation of Sugar Workers, also very prevalent in organizing on the island. And then international interests looking at Negros, aside from sugarcane, is also mining, so exploration and active open pit mining on the island. So I am not a farmer or an agroecologist, but the total land area is 1.3 million hectares, and 68% of the land on the island is agricultural land. And it's approximately half of the country's sugar production occurs on Negros. So it's a feudal and a hacienda system. So the land is highly concentrated in the hands of wealthy landlords. 2/3 of the land is under private monopoly control. Peasants hand over, so on the farms, peasants will be responsible for all of the agricultural production, and they will hand over 1/3 to 1/4 of everything they produce to the landlord. And you could be walking down the street in a community where you know there's pervasive hunger and a high rate of malnutrition, and there'll be bananas growing on the tree. And you'll ask your guide, why are these bananas here? And yet these people are hungry, and they'll say that there are eyes for the landlords everywhere. And they know when the bananas are ripe, and they know when the coconut is ripe, or when the mangoes are ripe, or when the papaya is ripe, and they know what's there, and they'll report to the landlord if the peasants are consuming the products themselves. So landlords and foreign agribusinesses, they manage to retain control of vast tracts of land despite legal policies that say there's going to be this agrarian reform and there's going to be redistribution of land to peasants, and policies look very good on paper. But in reality, in the communities, land is not being redistributed as it's intended. So landlords and agribusinesses retain control through things like saying, oh, well, I'm going to distribute stocks to instead of giving the land back, I'm going to give them share purchases. But the share purchases don't value anything near what the land is valued. Or they say, well, I'm going to convert my land to tourism or mining, or they do land conversion. So they find their way through it. So that the state plan, the comprehensive agrarian reform programs have failed to uplift the majority of the beneficiaries. Most of them who end up, even if they're awarded land, end up having to sell it back to their landlord. So everyday people, everyday struggle. So when we've had a number of delegations, so 3 now delegations to Negros, where we've traveled with local Vancouver organizers as well as health workers to do solidarity delegations, both in health work and in investigation of human rights cases. And one of the things that we documented was the high rate of malnutrition on the island. And this is a quote that Comrade Ayanis recorded. She's one of the organizers, a sugar worker and a mother of 10. She says, sometimes we eat, sometimes no eat, sometimes eat once per day. So we see that in the context of malnutrition, the wages are pushed very low on the island. So between 40 and 100 pesos a day. So right now that's, some like $1.25 to $1.75 Canadian dollars. Children start to work at age 8 or 10 years old because the way that the sugar cane fields are worked. I might contract to Parminder, she would subcontract to this family, and then this family brings all of their family members into work, and everybody must be working. So usually grade 3 to grade 6 is when students start to work. And you go visit a community and you see all of the children, grade 3 and under, in school, and you go back 3 years later and those children are not in school anymore. They're all already working. So there are about 335,000 children working on the island, and 26% of them are working on colonial sugar plantations. So one of the organizers, peasant leader in Negros Oriental, which is kind of the toe of the boot down in the south, they say, we are the ones who grow all the food, and yet our children go hungry. This is not a very good slide, it's kind of dark. But you'll see also then there are mining claims. So that there are, I read a figure that I actually didn't write down, but I think something like 76% of arable land also has mining interests putting in application for exploration on it. And a few of them in particular, like Philex Gold, is traded on the Toronto Stock Exchange, so we do see Canadian mining interests on the island. And then what happens is communities are pushed off of their land, off of the land that they might be farming in order for mining exploration to happen. Or what happens is they'll do an exploration up at the top of a mountain. They'll dig, just, maybe drill 2-3 times along. But the silt, they're just pumping water through this drill. And all of that water washes down and completely destroys the watershed underneath it. So all of the landslides into the rice fields right down to the ocean, and it kills the spawning fish. So that even the exploration of the mines destroys all of the land in its wake. And then, of course, you see migration to the city. So urban migration of displaced farm workers and peasants, it aggravates the urban poverty. And then we see, with typhoons, we see the devastation along the shoreline from natural disasters, which we know are natural man-made disasters, imperialist disasters, and then also demolition for development, because it's coastline, so we want to see tourism, we want the coastline to look pretty for our visiting dignitaries or our businessmen who come for their rest and relaxation, so that there's also communities face demolition. And then we see the results of all of these things, the economic exploitation, the social oppression, the forced migration, the demolitions of communities, is also then reflected on people's bodies, and we see a health crisis. We see very high maternal mortality rates on the island, very high rates of child nutrition, and rising rates of non-communicable diseases, hypertension, diabetes, ulcers from stress, these kinds of things. And then at the same time, we have communities living under virtual occupation from, it's not Oplan Bayanihan anymore. It is. Say it louder. I need to change my slide. What is the meaning of this? Because Bayanihan is like when we move the house together, right?
Operation Peace.
Peace. Operation Peace. Oh, very interesting. Because when we were there before, the military was using the tactic of social mission. So we're going to do a health clinic, we're going to do a run for health, or we're going to do, so the military is really trying to kind of insinuate itself, much like the police in our communities in East Vancouver, actually. So they live under a state of virtual occupation where you can't move about freely without being questioned by the military. What are you doing in this community? Why are you going here? Why are you going there? Checkpoints on the road or headquarters in schools, community centers. The military is present everywhere. They ask you to report. They ask you to come and report in at the office if you're going to be in that neighborhood or in that community. Or surrender. So we see CAFGU, which is a citizen armed force general unit. So the military giving arms to civilians, as well as investment defense forces. So special forces that surround sites of particular interest like mines. We wanted to see a mining site and we had to sneak around a 5-hour sneak around to see the mining site because we were trying to avoid this investment defense force that are there to protect the mining interests. And then the political repression of human rights defenders. So counterinsurgency targets, they target the legal mass movement. So peasant leaders, worker leaders, women's organizers, human rights defenders, youth and student health activists, progressive church organizations. If you're involved in a legal mass movement, you're a target by the state, from texting death threats to actual extrajudicial killings. So it's actually the last 4 leaders of the peasant group Kagawasan have been, 2 were murdered in an extrajudicial killing, 1 is in hiding, and 1 died from neglected health issues from after a long incarceration. Kagawasan is the peasant organization in Negros Oriental. So we see grave state repression, and this is Comrade Toto, who was the former chairman of Kagawasan, who was the leader because his sister, Amelia Carente, was in prison on a trumped-up charge of recruiting children for the New People's Army, which was completely falsified evidence. And then when he was the leader, he was murdered. The next leader had gone into hiding, and the subsequent leader after that, Endrick Calago, was also murdered. So the current leader is very, her picture is here, her name is Sonona Estrada, and of course we're very worried for the safety of these organizers. So this is the last leader of Kagawasan, Endrick Calago, and his wife Rosalie, who was actually a community health worker that I trained in childbirth emergencies. So these are just everyday organizers going about their work. They were shot, and then their house was burned down and their bodies were named. And so this is their daughter, their daughter Early, and we actually have a video testimony of her, which hopefully we can get translated. It's in Cebuano at this point, just calling out to the international community to say, pay attention to what's happening in our community. We stand up for our rights, for our justice, for what is our land that we tell, and even asking from 1/3 to 1/4 to the landlord, even asking to protect land from land conversion for tourism or development. We face extrajudicial killings for this. This is the murder of Roberto Sexon, who from Pamalacaya, who's the fisher folk, who was just murdered this past July 24th, shot dead in front of his house. And the accusation against him was transporting members of the New People's Army in his pump boat, but there's no actual evidence, and there's no opportunity for any kind of dialogue or discussion. It's just murder. But of course, the rage just fuels the fire of organizing, and the youth are so committed and passionate. The tensions between the farmers and landlords, workers and sugar barons, and peasants and mining companies gets very high. But communities are really solid in organizing to defend their rights. So when we were there in 2011, this was a reenactment that youth cultural workers had done, a reenactment of the murder of Toto Carente. So the marginalized sectors continue to fight for their land, for wages, for jobs and rights, and they make gains, incremental gains, constant incremental gains. And we see that the legal mass movement continues to grow. Of course, my evidence of this is the basketball jerseys. So we had this opportunity in our last trip in 2015. Solidarity organizers from Vancouver had the opportunity to visit a community where 100% of the members of that community participate in the People's Organization, which is organized through the peasant organization. And they had a literal 5-year plan on the wall of their barangay hall, and the achievements and the gains that they had been able to make in their community were astounding. Of course, my son, who was 13 at the time, was very impressed with because they have basketball jerseys for their basketball team, which was very cool. And their basketball jerseys are actually nicer than our East Van basketball jerseys. So it's like, oh, maybe we should organize our community. But they've actually managed to reclaim the land. So it's not just, can we have 25%, or can we give 25%, keep 75%? It's, can we just take it all, right? It's our land, we're tilling it. We're gonna actually just reclaim the land. So right now there's 2,000 hectares on the island being tilled. And in this particular communities, it's a process of negotiation through the community. You know, first we have our individual plots, and then we have this communal farm, and then eventually the community transfers to 100% communal farming. And I think that the one community that we had the chance to visit, we visited a number of communities kind of along that trajectory, but this one community, you know, it's the one where the light shines the most out of the kids' eyes. It's going to be right too. So this is one of the gains they've been able to make. So during Tiempos Muertos, during the downtime, the time between planting the sugarcane and harvesting, there's a downtime where there's not work for the sugar workers. So this community organized to grow corn, and they organized to buy a corn blower, so it actually blows dry air into the corn to dry it. And they could provide 100% food security for their community during Tiempo Muertos. Like, they told us how many sacks of corn this was, and it was lots. They were like calculating hundreds of sacks of corn. And they were actually generating their own electric power. It was, so they're generating people power, like actual, like people power metaphorically, but also people power literally, and that they were lighting their electricity for their homes. And it doesn't look very impressive. I'm like, oh, there's a channel of water here. This is cool. What's this? Oh, it's our dam for our hydroelectricity. I'm like, oh my gosh. So we actually walked on this pipe out here just to look over, and it's incredible what they're able to do. And then, of course, training health workers. So they have, in communities where there are no doctors, they have incredibly skilled health workers who are skilled in Western medicine, but also in acupuncture and then herbal medicine, which is relevant to their community. So they're doing amazing things. There's so many examples that we can glean and we can learn from, only in the application of our organizing work here in terms of international solidarity, because I think if there's going to be a breakthrough made against imperialism, it's going to come from guys like these who are really good organizers. And then, of course, what's our role? So what's the purpose of the campaign? The purpose of the campaign is to raise awareness, so raise consciousness. And I think that's a twofold consciousness raising, right? We need to raise consciousness about the extrajudicial killings, about the human rights situation, but also raise consciousness about the gains and the strides that are being made in terms of fighting imperialism in the Philippines. And then people-to-people solidarity. So like tonight, sharing our stories, our solidarity messages, raising money, and then going on delegations. So going on delegations, I think, also creates that bond of human relationship. And it also lends a hand and lends a voice to the organizers who don't have that international media spotlight. So with that, I think we will move on to our next